Afternoon adventurers, I'm back. It's Jacob, it's Half Sanity, coming at you with more Divine Soul spells. This time we're going over 8th level spells for the Cleric from their spell list, but with metamagic from the Divine Soul, seeing what we can do. This level, 8th level, there are only 5 spells to choose from, so I thought about doing like an ordered list where I would rank them, what I think are least to most useful maybe, but the problem is the spells at this level are so diverse that I could have made a dozen ordered lists based on a dozen different factors and had a dozen different outcomes. So let's go alphabetically. Yeah. First up, alphabetically, is Antimagic Field, which is a weird spell, because it's a spell that prevents you from casting other spells, and all your friends within 10 feet of you from casting other spells, and makes all of your magic items non-magical, and shuts down any magic class features you might have. So, it's a weird spell, but in certain situations it could be really useful. Like, if there's a pervasive environmental magical effect, like maybe your DM throws a permanent cloud kill area at you where it's just poison gas all the time. Antimagic Field it up. Whatever the case may be, casting Antimagic Field so that you and your party have a little bubble of safety that you can use to walk through the area to the other side could be useful, could be worth an 8th level spell slot, we'll see. But if you're in the situation where you need Antimagic Field, it does last for up to an hour, requiring concentration, so it can be doubled to 2 hours. In a non-combat sort of situation where you need it, you might need it longer than an hour, so that one sorcery point is going to go a very long way. I've been saying it sort of throughout the series, but I'll say it again. The higher level spells we get to, the more valuable these 1-point metamagics become. There's just so much value in doubling the duration of an 8th level spell. So, anytime you're casting the spell out of combat, strongly recommend just doubling that duration. In a combat situation though, Antimagic Field will probably be used mostly against enemy spellcasters, in which case Subtle Spell is a big plus, because you can cast the spell without risk of getting your big 8th level spell counterspelled. You do not want a resource like that to get shut down. Alternately, if you're not worried about getting counterspelled, maybe you're fighting magical creatures like beholders who have magical attacks, magical effects, but don't necessarily have counterspell, then you could instead cast the spell as a quicken spell and then use your action to dash, disengage, dodge, hide if you want, and try to avoid some damage that way. Although if you're shutting down the enemy's attacks like a beholder, well, they can still bite you. Anyway, that's basically what you can do with Antimagic Field, so let's move on to Control Weather. Control Weather is very much an out-of-combat utility type spell. It takes 10 minutes to cast, has a range of self. It's not really eligible for most metamagics. In fact, it's only eligible for 2, and those are Subtle Spell, like everything is, and Extended Spell, because it has a duration of 8 hours, which can be doubled to 16. If you're going to cast a spell like Control Weather in the first place, you might as well make it last all day. Control Weather is definitely a spell that you need to work with your DM and really understand and make use of the extreme weather conditions in the Dungeon Master's Guide, things like extreme heat and extreme cold, heavy rainfall, fog, all of these things, so that your 8th level spell can actually have some effect. Maybe you're using the weather to protect a location when you're expecting an attack, so you use the extreme heat to give your enemies maybe a level of exhaustion or something. Again, this is going to be very dependent on your DM and your group, how much this will really affect your campaign. So I don't think I can recommend that a Divine Soul take this in good conscience. It's one thing for a cleric to prepare it one day in anticipation of an event where they can make use of it. For another example, if you are about to undertake a journey on a boat, maybe take control weather to get the winds to always be in your favor for, 8, 16 hours a day. But for a sorcerer to learn it is a much bigger commitment. So I think your 8th level picks and your 8th level slots are probably going to go somewhere better. That's my take on it. But as with anything, your mileage may vary. If you're in the right kind of campaign that could really make use of it, by all means. And by all means, spend that 1 point to extend it to 16 hours. But that's about all I've got for control weather, so let's press on to our third spell, Earthquake. Now, Earthquake is another very situational spell. It's one that, again, a cleric could benefit really strongly from preparing for one day when they know they're going to be assaulting an enemy keep, or might need to collapse a cave system, something like that, and then prepare a different spell the next day. Learning it on a sorcerer is, again, a bit more costly, but if you really want to, it's there. As for metamagic, the spell can benefit pretty greatly from extended spell, which I normally don't save for 1 minute long spells, because fights don't usually last more than a minute. But Earthquake is more about siege, but laying siege to an enemy encampment or stronghold probably will last more than 1 minute. And the fact that Earthquake deals 50 damage on each of your turns to structures in its area means that doubling the duration from 1 minute to 2 minutes is going to double the damage to those structures from 500 to 1,000. Now it's going to be up to your DM to determine how much HP a building has, but 1,000 is a really big number, even for that. So there's that. Earthquake also has a very prodigious range of 500 feet, which can be doubled with distance spell to 1,000 feet, which is even farther than longbowmen can shoot. It's longer than basically any other spell, except Meteor Swarm. And it's going to get you that first strike siege advantage. You can stand 1,000 feet away from a stronghold's walls, out of range of its archers, and lay down an earthquake to destroy the place and deal damage to the people that are near or in those buildings, and also just make the whole area a really inhospitable place to be. So if you're in that sort of situation where you are assaulting an enemy location, Earthquake could absolutely decimate the place. It is a weapon of war. Although, on one final note, Earthquake does deal damage to creatures if a building collapses on or near them, like I mentioned, so you can use the empowered spell metamagic because it's damage being dealt by a spell. That might be up to some DM interpretation, but the damage is listed in the spell's description, so I at least would rule that that is part of the spell's damage and can be rerolled with empowered metamagic. Just as a note, it's only 5d6, so take that as you will with an 8th level slot, but hey, it's an option. And with that said, that's about it for Earthquake, our siege weapon Earthquake. So let's move on to a defensive spell, Holy Aura. Holy Aura is a powerful defensive buff, one that should not be underestimated. For the duration, all the creatures that you designate within 30 feet of you, including you, shed dim light within 5 feet, but also, much more importantly, have advantage on all saving throws, and enemies of all types have disadvantage on attacks against those creatures. This is a huge buff, and I have seen this in play, and it is just as effective as it sounds. Honestly, I'm not sure if metamagic even makes this stronger than it already is. What it can do is make the spell even faster than it already is. With the quicken spell metamagic, we can cast this as a bonus action, and even though we're limited to cantrips, we can still do something with our action like dash, dodge, protect ourselves even further. I just said dodge, but you don't need to dodge, because enemies already have disadvantage, so scratch that. But you can still take a different action. You could drink a potion to prepare for the following rounds. You could just reposition yourself with a dash, etc. I'm sure you can all come up with your own uses. Other than that, the spell can be cast as a subtle spell. Again, if you're against spellcasters, you can prevent yourself being counterspelled. That is invaluable with a spell of this level, and it only costs 1 sorcery point. The spell can also be extended, although, again, there's not really much use of that, as this is a 1-minute spell to be used in combat. Most fights don't last that long, as I mentioned. But if you don't feel like casting it as a quickened or a subtle spell, you might as well. I almost never cast spells up at these high levels without using some kind of metamagic. That might just be me, but I feel like if I'm gonna spend such a resource as an 8th level spell slot, I might as well drop a single sorcery point and get some kind of benefit, even if it doesn't make that big a difference in the long run. Great as Holy Aura is, that's about all the metamagic can do for it, so let's move on to our last spell, our most straightforward spell, Sunburst. Sunburst is going to be our direct damaging attack for this level. It deals a whopping 12d6 radiant damage, which, to be fair, puts it ever so slightly behind an 8th level fireball, which would be 13d6, but hey. Sunburst also has a massive 60-foot radius, much larger than fireball, so if you can cast at a large group of enemies from a distance, you can hit a lot of people at once with this. And to help with that, you can even cast the spell as a distance spell, doubling its range from 150 feet to 300. Now, if you so choose, you can use Heightened Spell Metamagic to give one creature disadvantage on their saving throw, but this might not be as useful in some situations because undead and oozes already have disadvantage. Which is fine, because with a massive AoE like this, giving one person disadvantage is maybe not the best use of 3 sorcery points, in my opinion. Your mileage may vary. But what Sunburst does well is cover a massive area, deal a bunch of damage, and potentially blind its targets. Because of its massive radius and its fairly potent debuff of blinding creatures, Sunburst could be used to hit a large amount of enemies, but also a few allies when the situation arises. Maybe some of your melee friends are already up in the mix by the time you have a chance to cast, and use the Careful spell metamagic, which is the first time I've said that this series, to protect your allies from some of that damage and from the blinded effect. Blinding your allies would be probably worse than damaging them, so being able to guarantee that they succeed their first saving throw is better than not doing that. So you'll still hit them with a bit of radiant damage, but they won't be blind, and your enemies quite possibly will. Maybe not the friendliest move, but if it gets a ton of damage out to just a ton of enemy creatures, it could be worth it. And so that wraps up Sunburst, which wraps up the 8th level spells. There aren't that many, so here we are. Thanks for watching. It's the end of the video now. Like and subscribe if you want to. I don't even know what this outro is. See you in the next one. 9th level spells coming up. It's exciting stuff. Peace.